I'll just start the introduction. We'll start, right? Welcome everyone to this Thursday's Science Education Department seminar. We've had 2 outside speakers in the last month, which is kind of exciting, and actually 3. I guess we have 2 today. I want to welcome Ellen Lishness and Dana Hutchins today, who are going to speak on some of their citizen science projects. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on them. Ellen recently founded a firm called Parabolica Design, which is focusing on the design, development, and operation of technology-enabled learning environments. One such learning environment that he was involved in for many, many years is the Coenset for Interactive Learning at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, which if you haven't ever visited, it's really wonderful. And this is an exhibit really that welcomes 75% of Maine's 5th and 6th grade students, and they pursue activities in this around fishing, coastal fishing and habitats, and as they do so, they collect data, and then all the data they collect ends up creating their own website that they can use in their classroom later and follow up on content and do a lot of things. Ellen's interest in learning environments, I thought this was really interesting, is driven by some questions around how people engage with science and evidence-based decision-making. And he says those questions are whether and how technology-mediated experiences enable engagement and learning, how building design, how design influences human interactions, how the maker movement integrates with formal education, how corporations and foundations can align their STEM education priorities with the public education system, and the nature of innovation in small places, and how educational successes in other countries can be adapted to differing cultural norms in Maine and the United States. Dana Hutchins is the president and creative director of ImageWorks, which is a web design and interactive research and development firm, and ExhibitNet, which is a learning systems design firm that focuses on science communication, science exhibit design, user research, usability, and human factors engineering. Now, we first met Dana in the development of the Black Holes exhibition that SAO did, that many of you know is still traveling around the country. It's in Michigan now. And ImageWorks, we were really interested in this Coenset for Interactive Learning and how the technology worked. And ImageWorks helped us design the back-end database that drives the user experience in the Black Holes exhibit. Dana notes that his professional career in science communication began in the early 1990s, relevant to this audience, when he collaborated with the late physicist John Wheeler on a video about his work. And that led to another project working with Kip Thorne and Robbie Vogt to create a video on LIGO that was presented to the Congress and other potential funding and public support. And over the past 10 years, Dana's been a presenter at Aztec, Museum of the Web, conferences multiple times, speaking on his work around science exhibit personalization and techniques for extended learner engagement. And we're all interested in all those kinds of things. So we look forward to your talk. This talk, by the way, is being webcast and archived for sharing later. Great.
Well, Mary, thank you very much for your gracious introduction. We are delighted to be here. In thinking about the morning's presentation, I was shocked to realize that Dana and I have been working together for some 38 years now. So, and there's this great picture that I really wanted Dana to put up. It's of the 2 of us in a leopard skin and zebra bathrobes in a hotel room, but he was too shy and bashful to do that. So what I want to do is just kind of frame up largely what Dana's going to talk about, kind of pre-outline it, such that if it sounds really dull, you can leave early. I want to start by establishing a bit of context around the goal. GMRI's educational goal is to cultivate a science-literate public. They picture doing this over, say, a 20 or 30-year period, and their strategy for accomplishing this goal is to create multiple science engagements with significant percentages of Maine's middle school students. So in the state of Maine, that's grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. And there are about 13,200 students in the grade cohort, and we'd love to get to over 10,000 every year because it's just a very interesting effect over time. So I'm going to kind of do a rough summary of what GMRI's 3 educational programs are. And then Dana's going to talk about why they were designed the way they were and how they were designed. So first of all, our largest program is called Lab Venture. And as Mary mentioned, we're bringing over 10,000 kids to a working marine science lab in Portland. And the driving premise for Lab Venture is something that GMRI calls universal access. Something that we would make available for one learner in Maine in a specific group, we would make available for all learners in that group in Maine. So for instance, geographically, it's a gigantic state. There's a lot of real estate and there aren't a lot of people. And literally, the biggest cost of the Lab Venture program is busing. We pay to go and get kids and bring them back because a lot of districts could not afford an 8-hour bus ride down and back. So I'm gonna let Dana get into the details, but in gross numbers, last year we saw 10,000 kids. That was about 75% of the cohort. Our goal is to see 90% of the cohort. It's strictly a money issue. We work with about 250 5th and 6th grade science teachers every year out of a total of 335. And as Dana will describe in a couple of instances, we're looking at various science themes, and we switch out the content for the Coenset every 3 years. The second program, which quite naturally evolved, in fact, it actually started a tiny bit earlier than Lab Venture, is called Vital Signs. So Vital Signs is a community of practice that involves teachers, students, scientists, and citizen scientists. Students and teachers are out in the field looking for the presence or absence of invasive species. Then there are a number of science reviewers who are looking at that work, and I think there are about 70 now. Some of them are 15 years old, and many of them are adults. And they're kind of vetting the student work and asking additional questions and making sure that what gets posted is rigorous and accurate. And Dana will talk about there are a number of scientists who are using this data in their research because there aren't enough researchers and the budgets aren't big enough, but there are kids in every town interested in learning science. And then GMRI's third program is called Powerhouse. And one important aspect of both Vital Signs and Powerhouse is that every 7th and 8th grader in Maine and their teachers have their own Apple laptop computer. That program, I think, is 9 years old now. There's decent bandwidth in every classroom in the state, and it has really facilitated us at GMRI working with ImageWorks to develop apps for those laptop computers. So in the case of Powerhouse, we've been able to connect kids and their laptops to their household smart meter. And there's about a 24-hour lag, so the data's not real time, but it's not real bad. And what students are doing is saying, okay, they're going to establish a goal of how much they would like to reduce their energy use, and then they're going to be able to monitor it. And GMRI has continued to add functionality, and the latest piece is one of my favorites. There's an organization called ISO New England that traffic cops how everybody has whatever amount of electricity they need at whatever particular time in New England. So they're constantly switching plants in and out, and obviously on a hot July day, there's going to be peaking demand, so the coal plants are going to fire up and the oil plants are going to fire up. So we've connected the kids to that data, which is available every 10 minutes. So they can make decisions. If you have some flexibility in when you wash your clothes, do it at an off-peak time. because you'll also be able to drive down CO2 output. So those are the three programs in brief. Dana's going to talk a whole lot about GMRI's pedagogy and a bit about the process of content development for all GMRI programs. Kind of one of the big deals that it's actually a lot like you guys that makes it easy for the education group at GMRI is that we have resident scientists in the building working all the time. And they're excited about this stuff. So they're constantly thinking about things they're working on that middle schoolers might find interesting. They're also telling us when our ideas are either stupid or wrong. And it's just great to have that direct connection with the science community. So what's the upshot of all this? Well, as I mentioned, over 20 or 30 years, GMRI hopes to look back and say, hey, there are some people who get this idea of evidence-based reasoning, and they know how to do it, and they can be contributors, hence the citizen science component of today's talk. So for most students, their first exposure to GMRI is through the Lab Venture program, because they're 5th and 6th graders. And then for an interestingly fairly high percentage of 7th and 8th grade students, so a lot of kids who've been to Lab Venture end up doing either or both Vital Signs or Powerhouse. So Lab Venture comes first, and kids learn the kind of the basics of asking meaningful questions, making hypotheses, making observations, taking measurements, and comparisons to support or refute their hypotheses. And what this approach does is it puts students in charge of their own investigations. One of my favorite aspects of the way GMRI approaches learning is that adults aren't very involved. For instance, in the Coenset, there's GMRI staff just to make sure the equipment's working, and there are teachers and parent chaperones, but they don't have any input at all to the peer-to-peer science learning process, which is really interesting. So Lab Venture becomes the training ground for the field data collection that is the very essence of Vital Signs. And just a tiny bit about the mechanics of Lab Venture. The capacity is set at 2 classrooms per visit because that would enable GMRI to see 90% of the grade cohort during every school year. It's also limited by the fact that the 3 biggest buses in the state of Maine can only carry that many kids. There are 2 other areas that we thought about talking about today and we're prepared to discuss if they come up in the questioning, but we didn't really think they were relevant to the theme. And those 2 areas are platforms and support platforms and operations. So if stuff comes up about that afterwards, we're happy to talk about that. And with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to Dana.
Thank you, Alan. So in terms of the Coenset experience and really how that works and how we designed that. So, we really looked at, okay, what gets students engaged, what keeps them engaged, and so forth. And we, over a couple of year period, we tested in a series of very simple prototypes designed. We had done a secondary research about this. We had looked at all of the reference projects around the country, around the world, around this. But one of the things that became fairly obvious to us was that a sense of autonomy was really an important issue. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. Also having opportunities for action, having rich informational feedback, going from an initial scaffolding of competence into mastery, also having a connection and collaboration, and for the students to see themselves as a valued part of a community. And of course, this is based on some very, very interesting research. A lot of people have worked in this. Self-determination theory is one of the names that a lot of this stuff has. It's been used very extensively by Ryan, Deci, and Rigby in work that they've done, research they've done for Microsoft and other video game companies about getting students to resubscribe to these things. So there's been a huge amount of data that has been collected around these things. And there's some very interesting pieces. There's a lot of interesting research available around all of this, supporting that has millions of data points at this point from looking at video games and other situations. That was relevant to us. Although I have to clarify, we didn't know about this when we started. If we had known, it probably would have not been that helpful, to tell you the truth. We really started from first principles and direct observation of student behavior with very, very primitive, simple things, and built up to that. So it was only much later, after this was in operation for 2 or 3 years, that and going out there and really scouring the research about this stuff, that I came across and said, yes, this is one of the best kind of frameworks that really gets this, and that we see over and over again with the thousands of students who come and visit the Coenset every year. So, the basics of this is, I'll just go through this quickly. The learners get welcomed as part of the research communities. Right away, as they're coming into the lobby, you have 40 or 50 students with their teachers and chaperones, and they all do a shout out to the researchers in the building. So we hear that. Our ImageWorks office is at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute now, and so we hear this a couple times a day during the school year, pretty much every school day, where they do a shout out to the building and everything, and it just kind of starts things off in a great way. Throughout the activity, we use the multimedia to recognize learners individually and visually throughout the program. The students' group picture is taken, and that actually goes from station to station, not unlike some of the things that we did in the Black Hole Project. So that's another very important part of that. We provide scaffolded question problem structure and so forth to really guide students through this, but just enough to be able to have them have success without kind of over-prescribing and giving them too much. We try to make these, and this is one that's tough, but try to make these questions and problems optimally challenging. We have a very broad array of students, 5th and 6th grade students, coming to the Coen Center from all over the state of Maine with all kinds of capabilities, and that is something that it just requires a certain amount of tweaking to the design and iteration and so forth in order to have that work well. There's a lot of informational feedback that goes on throughout each of these 17-minute activities. And then the other thing we really try to do is to focus on intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic rewards and motivation per the research. We've had a couple of different summit evaluations done, and there have been annual impact studies done with a number of different groups, but one of the major ones was done by the PER group at Lesley in 2008. And since then, there have been some additional ones, because one of the things about this is that over the course of the 9 years or so that the Lab Venture program has been running, there have been 3 completely different, separate content streams that have happened, both in the exhibits and online, with the student work getting published up to their personal websites, not unlike, again, the Black Hole exhibit. We see that even with these different, each of these different content streams, we see students continue to engage and be inspired in their learning, and we can talk more about that, and I'm happy to entertain questions around that. I'm going to switch over to the other half of the presentation here. So now I'd like to go into a little more detail about the Vital Signs program, which really started to be designed in 2007, was launched in 2009, is really part of a large community that involves the researchers at Gulf of Maine, but also researchers at universities around New England who are looking to use this data and so forth. And that's what this program is about. So we've really been focusing since we started this on invasive species. Where are they in Maine? Where aren't they in Maine? There are many researchers who would like to know and like to address these questions, but with only a small number of field researchers available to cover the whole state and a 3,000-mile long coastline and many bodies of water, it's not easy. So that's one of the things that has really been great to use the citizen science approach and tap into this statewide network that Gulf of Maine has created, students and adults also, to look for invasive species, to be trained in a meaningful protocol so that they can produce data of sufficient quality, And there's also there are some checks and balances on that, because researchers actually and biologists, volunteers actually go in and review the data, review the photos, the descriptions, the locations, the habitat descriptions, and so forth, to confirm or suggest a different, or correct and so forth, suggest a different identification, different explanations of things, different descriptions, and so forth. And this is really the Vital Science program is really giving the tools giving students the tools to help them make important contributions to mapping and monitoring, and more importantly, even early detection effort around these things. So this is a recent map. This is the latest map. It shows about 6,000 observations that have been published since 2009, when the project started. This community of practice is all across the state of Maine. The places that you see where there aren't any observations, there aren't many people there. So basically, this involves 100 schools and so forth around the state. The community of practice and the expert community, extends into all the New England states, and so that's been, as well as New York State. So that's been really gratifying to see so many people take an interest and get involved. As Alan said, we have about 70 active scientists, species experts, 250 educators who have come to institutes at GMRI so far for PD, more than 2,500 students a year, and plus a few hundred adult data collectors. One of the things we've done more recently is to involve groups of people who are involved in master gardener programs and watershed groups and so forth, and so we have about another 70 people involved with that. The Vital Signs program, and this is the picture of the website homepage, which is kind of one of the central starting places, has many pathways through it, and it's one of the great strengths, I think, in terms of the wide range of participants who can be involved, because there are students that we have collecting data, doing this as early, even though it wasn't designed for that, as early as like 3rd grade, and then we have people who are my age and older, much older. So one of the popular pathways for students is to choose a mission, of which there are several different types. Field missions are research questions that are posed by the scientific community. These are a way for students and citizens to focus their data collection efforts on questions of interest to these specific researchers or organizations. Participants can also answer questions with data, make new meaning and interpretations of their data in the context of this large database of observations that have been collected. And they can also create multimedia projects, share finding, and connect across the community. So in trying to do this, there were a number of really important challenges that were set out, that is balancing the research and education goals, both of which are essential to the program, to the success of the program. Connecting participants and researchers, which sometimes is not easy, and especially sustaining that kind of connection over a long period of time, which we've done now for 6 years or more. And then, of course, letting participants access the information, resources, and visualize the data, share findings. So people can get in there, and they can really use the data and the tools that are there to do a lot of interesting work. We also want to engage a diverse audience beyond the data collection, and of course, we want to collect useful data, which is one of the most challenging things of all. In order to do that, we worked with these advisors and collaborators, in order to establish the plans needed to evaluate, to assessment and so forth of the program. And so there's a lot of ongoing work now that is going on based on plans and updates to those things and refinements to those plans that have been going on now for the past 6 years on this program. For instance, GMRI has worked closely with Bridget Barron and Caitlin Martin at Stanford School of Education, looking into the subject, which relates to their research interest, into students' interests and motivations around technology and science. And so one of the other things that GMRI is working on more now is on more ways to capture and assess learning that is happening both offline and online. We know students and citizen scientists are contributing high-quality data, but what are they learning in the process? Are there online tools we can use to learn more and collect more and understand more about that? So, in the process of doing this research, this is one of the missions. This is a favorite, rock snot. Going out and looking for this stuff. It's a great thing about doing marine science stuff. There's some really nasty, bizarre stuff out there that people can get their hands dirty in. This is a research mission put up by a researcher and one of the managers, Paul Gregory, at the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. GMRI has worked very closely with Maine DEP and a number of other offices around the state of Maine who are involved in this. So the good news is that rock snot, as so far, has not been observed. Doesn't mean it's not there, but it has not been observed by this cohort of students, a lot of whom have been out there looking for it in these environments, and so far so good. But we know that it's on its way because it has been identified in New Hampshire. So it's, these things don't stay outside of Maine for long. Teachers and students, when they go out and do their field work, they first do preparation in the classroom, and then they use tools like these species cards, for instance, in order to identify things, have more information, and then ask additional questions, come up with their own questions in their notes, and so forth. The species cards are something that we've tested and developed with the help of scientists and citizens and students, and refined those things over the past 6 years. When classes are in the field, they often record videos about their protocol and findings. They're also, of course, doing photos and drawings and taking lots of notes while they're there. After they do their field work, the teams then go back and enter their data, go back to the classroom, their laptops, and collectively and collaboratively enter their data in order to support the research claims of what they think is they're finding, not finding, why, all of that stuff. And they really go through quite an interesting protocol and learning process in that. They usually have to provide several pieces of written and photo evidence to support their claims, along with GPS and other location and environmental data. Once they've carefully reviewed those data entries, and there are a couple of stages to publish and everything, they hit publish, and their observations are immediately made public on the Vital Signs site. In this case, for example, Paul Gregory from the Maine DEP was immediately notified when there was one of the first rock snot observations that they thought they had made, and their evidence was looked at. He was immediately notified by email. He was able to go in, look at this, and then offer his team comments. And so there's a lot of social sharing that is built into the system, built into the Vital Signs web app and so forth around this. Paul got other scientists involved to check the sample, and conversations back and forth with the students and DEP. Ultimately, the good news, they decided that it was not rock snot, but a close relative, which doesn't sound that encouraging either. But I'm not sure what kind of snot it was, but it was snot. So. So Paul was relieved to be able to question this particular identification. Of course, species experts, go through all of the observations. So all the 6,000 plus observations have been reviewed by species experts, and then anyone in the community can comment on that identification or the arguments around that. So there is really an ongoing conversation that takes place over time about the evidence. So Vital signs really, their investigations look different in each different classroom. This group of 5th and 6th grade students use vital signs to map native and invasive species on this island in southern Maine. It's right near Portland. They later extended their work to explore the impact of invasive species on ecological communities, to do habitat restoration on this island, Mackworth Island, which is an island owned by the state, very popular place. We walk our dogs there weekly and so forth, and it's a beautiful spot, especially at this time of year. But then they also connected with students on another island, much farther north and much farther out to sea, Vinalhaven, in order to compare island species and to build their identification skills together as a set of teams. They're now planning a new vital signs field mission comparing biodiversity across the two islands and hoping to engage other island schools in doing the same kind of thing. And I mean, just in Casco Bay alone, there are 100 populated islands or something in Casco Bay, where Portland is, and so forth. And up and down the coast of Maine, there are many more than that. So students who've been introduced to vital signs in the classroom, they're really starting to go out and then use this on their own time, not just as part of classroom work, and that we've really seen a lot of that happening, in order to explore their local environments and to participate in online community. A student here is known as the bug girl because she's crazy about bugs that are used in the vital signs in summertime in order to continue to explore her interests. So she's been out there using a transect, using protocols, noting all this stuff down, doing descriptions, and doing a lot of interesting work all on her own. So we have many more stories about like this, and happy to share them. They're all online on the vitalsignsme.org website, and there are many resources also for educators to support this. Things that the Gulf of Maine staff has created, and many things that other educators have contributed to the community. We also have done work a lot of work in the area of professional development, and as I said, there are about 250 teachers who participated in the PD Institutes over the past 6 years. It's been a really important, successful part of the program, continues to grow. And we've also done work around this with the play group at USC Annenberg with Henry Jenkins and Aaron Riley and so forth, to publish some of the findings, some of the methods and so forth around this in a couple of different papers that have been published. One of the things that really is kind of special about the professional development is that there are long-term relationships between educators and GMRI staff and researchers and people in management in ecosystems and so forth around the state. Really isn't about just kind of pumping teachers through institutes. It's really about maintaining and growing, building relationships, and that has been something that has the GMRI staff has very much focused on and had great success with. This is one of the teachers, some comments from Pat Parent, who was a teacher at Massabesic Middle School. I was actually, that was my alma mater, not the middle school, but the high school. Massabesic High School, Waterboro, go Mustangs. So that's, that is something that has been great, is to have these passionate educators who are involved with this project, and that continues to grow as well. So we also have done some work with adult contributors to the program. This is something from a citizens group in the rural Keyser Lake area. There are many lake associations around the state of Maine who are already very involved in this kind of stuff. So this gives them an additional structure and means to share these things in a more structured and share the data in a more scientifically accurate, reliable way. Have people actually look at it and let them know whether or not what they think is happening, whether what they're finding is what really is happening. there's a lot of experimentation that's gone on and taken Gulf of Maine in new directions in terms of this was an institute that was held a few years ago for 12 of these lake observers. That's continued. That program has continued to grow. There are a bunch of people who get out on the water and really get into this as a thing to participate in. So the adults who were involved in this actually they also very much enjoy collecting the photo evidence, having it published online. They're being a part of the community and so forth. But they do it a little bit differently. Sometimes they submit the data in written form and other forms, and GMRI staff actually enters it for them if they're not comfortable. There's a limited labor resource to do that stuff, but that has been done in special cases where we're trying to encourage people to stay involved, get involved, who may not feel as comfortable with using computers, entering this data, and so forth. To recap a little bit, professionals are most interested and excited about some of these things: getting notified, having this tool to target research and resources, having a statewide network to tap into, and having this data review process that is very visually understandable. That is very clear in terms of that, and I'm happy to show you some more of that maybe in later today. So that this also shows something about the high quality of the data that's already gone through a careful data review process. You can see from the graph that citizens and scientists are pretty good at identifying species using our resources, and then again there are the checks on that. We also use automated reporting and graph about participants to see how how participants use this over time, how things are changing. There's a huge amount of data that we've collected from the system in order to evaluate how to improve it, how to improve the programs, and so forth. So really, in terms of why the Vital Signs program seems to be working, and what the lessons are, it's easy for us, having been very close to this, to overlook, but it's essential that we started with questions that scientists actually needed help with, that there was authentic data that needed to be collected and so forth, and accurate data that needed to be collected. Another reason is that, for success is that Vital Signs working, we involve groups and students and teachers and citizens and science in the design process from the very beginning and all throughout the whole process. And then when we met with scientists and teachers together, we asked questions like, what data would you trust and use from students and citizen scientists? Which native and invasive species can a novice identify successfully? What sampling methods can students use successfully in just 40 minutes of an activity outside? These are some of the researchers who are using the Vital Signs data. There are many more. These are some who've been very involved in formulating, requesting missions, and supporting the ongoing data field collection that has happened for Vital Signs. This is our original group out in a prototype test at Crescent Beach in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, that was doing the development of the project with our transect, our first transect that we had. And just to really give credit to the people who really have been most instrumental in making this happen, and we wanted Sarah Morisseau, who is in the center, to be able to be here today. Unfortunately, scheduling conflicts did not allow her to be involved in this, but Sarah Kern and Sarah Morisseau and Christine Boyer are really the ones who have built this, along with ImageWorks working on it, and of course Alan. But these are the three people who are most responsible for the success of this program and have really stayed with it. Now, Sarah actually left GMRI after being there for 9 years, and now works for my company, ImageWorks. And we're very excited about that, but we're all still in the same building together, and we still get to collaborate on things and so forth. So here are a few, there's some additional resources that I will put up, links to some other information, research, and so forth, and that has been involved with this at our website, imageworks.com/CFA, if you're interested in that. And I'm happy, and I'm sure Alan will be happy to talk about, answer any other questions that we can. Thank you.
Great. We'll have questions. Frank, and then Cindy.
Okay.
And if you could repeat the question
Yes.
for the...
Good. Yes.
So Dana, I saw the map of all the observations in that.
Yes.
I guess the basic question I have, does invasive species track humans, and thus it's meeting the needs of researchers because you have so many observations where people are, and because you have eyes out in the field where they might actually be dispersing all these invasive species.
Yes.
Or you need even more eyes into remote areas, but then it's like a feedback loop there.
Yeah.
So is that a basic question that researchers are actually looking at, and it's a problem to be solved?
Yes, and so the question is whether or not the observations that are made are because there are people there tracking where people are located, but that doesn't necessarily indicate where observations and invasive species might be in other locations where no one has looked for that. And so the answer to that is, yeah, that's a problem. It's a problem. If there isn't somebody out there looking for it, I mean, this is the cohort, this is the resource that we started to take advantage of. Students who were available during the school year, and then try to encourage them to do this on their own year round. But that's one of the reasons for really involving more adult citizen scientists in the program. That's a big push, and that's really the only practical way to kind of address that longer term. So yes, of course, there's no guarantee that these invasive species aren't, and we know that they are moving many different things. I mean, one of the big things along the coast, of course, has been green crab. That's a whole huge problem and challenge to the shellfish industry in Maine. There are just green crabs all along the coast of Maine. Whenever we have student teams out there looking for them, they find them pretty much everywhere all the time. So, but yes, where things are, where they're spreading, that we haven't looked, that is an issue. Yes.
But the first part of your hypothesis is really credible, because while there are exceptions, invasives do tend to travel on human vectors. So, for instance, the first green crab in Maine was found adjacent to an oil terminal that was seeing 600 ships from around the world, and it was the first one anybody had ever seen. So, it's kind of some of each.
Okay, I got a lot of questions, but I told Cindy she'd be next.
That's
So
okay, and it might be a duplicate of Frank's question. I'm not sure. Maybe it spins off of Frank's question. You had mentioned when the students were looking for this rock snot, which I've never heard of, but interesting. And
It's called Didimo, is this?
Right, and they had submitted their sample, and it ultimately was not what they thought it was, but related to it, which you also said is found in New Hampshire. So I'm wondering if through this program, if you're able to track the progression and evolution of these things before they get to Maine, by utilizing sites outside of Maine, and to kind of see the uh-oh, here it comes, and what can we do before it gets there?
Yes, and maybe Alan can talk about that a little bit, but yes, so actually there's been a lot of data from New Hampshire. I mean, one of the good things about Maine is we only have one border. We have the Canadian border, I shouldn't say, but we only have one U.S. border, and that's with New Hampshire. So we can, that's a pretty finite mark there. So yes, we pulled in data from EDDS and from other resources and so forth in order to look at that and to look at these things. I don't know whether whether specific researchers have gone into that. I actually have used the data to build time sequences of videos and so forth, just as a demonstration of change over time, so that the students could then do that themselves. And so that was pretty interesting to see that, even over to just a period of a few years. But it also had to do with what the adoption and spread of the program was that we were seeing, because there were more observations. So that is a very fundamental question: who's there to see it? Who's not there to see it? And so forth. What does that indicate? Alan, did you have anything else to add?
Here, and then Roy and Ari. So.
Okay. This is probably a little too general question about the role of citizen science in actual scientific research. So in order to understand this, I'd like to know what are the main focus of scientific research of GMRI, and to what extent, how many of those programs are actually impacted by citizen science activities, and if there are other parts, why are they not impacted by citizen science? And is it because such things are not amenable to citizen science?
So can you repeat the question?
So the question is the work that students are doing impacting the work that GMRI scientists are doing? And in some cases, the answer is yes, and absolutely not limited to GMRI scientists. So of those 70 species experts, just wild guess, I'm going to guess that maybe 6 or 7 get a paycheck from GMRI. So it's much more distributed than that. The things that students wouldn't do would just be the pragmatic, obviously any kind of deep ocean research, anybody studying ocean currents and such, and out on big boats far offshore. So what we're looking at is the water's edge, because that's where kids and classes can have access.
Coastline.
Excuse me?
The coastline.
Yes.
But also the watershed.
And fresh water.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of researchers doing work in that space. So they're tending, as Dana mentioned, to form the questions and to kind of look at these proposed missions and say, well, yeah, do we care? If we had 700 observations on that, would it matter? So given the origin of the missions, it's pretty tightly correlated to what researchers are looking for. But it does tend to be not too far from the school geographically.
Roy?
I wonder if you could say something about what kinds of factors do motivate the kids. You had mentioned you had some factors from self-determination theory and so forth, but knowing your work, I know that there's so much more that you add to that. I mean, for example, even just aesthetics, and it's so beautiful. And I wonder if you could say something about what you see motivating or not motivating kids, and how that changes as they get into age.
You should talk about that.
Alan
is the aesthetician. Alan is responsible for the beauty of these things. He really is. So
thank you, Dana.
We've been involved in that.
But to say, what do students respond to? Obviously, different students respond to numerous different things, and you couldn't make a blanket statement. But if I had to pick one, I would say being treated with respect. So we built this lab for, I don't know, a couple of $1 million, and it's got some of the coolest equipment in it, and it's shiny, and there's a ton of bright screens, and kids are turned loose in it, and adults have no idea what's going on. We did some really interesting research with Dana when we were prototyping. We tested a bunch of activities, and the parent volunteers or the teachers kept kind of horning in because they got really excited. I mean, it's a live lobster we're looking at here. Literally, half the time, the adults' answers were wrong. And kids don't have a mechanism for saying, gosh, Mr. Hutchins, you're an idiot. They just kind of have to nod their head and say, okay, he's an idiot. So I think it's that autonomy thing. It's saying it's a combination of autonomy and you're working on this together. It's up to you. You can goof off. And there's been funny little things that kids will hold their fingers up like this behind other kids. And then GMRI will invariably end up getting an apology saying, wow, that was kind of a really dumb thing to do, wasn't it? Because we were really doing more serious work. So I think it's treating the kids with integrity is probably the big thing.
All right.
I've loved your work for years, right? So I really have two questions. You can pick which one to answer if you'd like.
Great.
And they're about one for each program. So invasive species, I'm interested sort of in the psychology of a group that goes out and looks for something that it doesn't find, right? You know, and what do you do to make that a rewarding experience? It's great that they didn't find it, except for them maybe it's, you know, less great. And what do you do to make that a rewarding experience even so? And then on the other side, I'd love to hear more really about how you design activities in such a way that really permits autonomy, but also helps them to go in a direction where they'll actually get something right. Because that's, you know, designing, I mean, even, you know, it's true at all educational levels, trying to design a project for somebody where they can really go on their own, but at the same time you have a reasonable hope that they will have something that feels like a success, and that feels like, that is a success, but something that they understand is a success. And so I guess it's really the same question in both, in the two realms.
I kind of have opinions about each, but I'm going to start with the second one. There is no doubt that what GMRI practices in the lab venture experience is guided inquiry. It is not wide open, you can't come in and do anything. That's our vision.
Right.
That kids would pose their own questions out of the absolute blue, and we would be able to sort information, resources, and methods such that they could answer their own questions. And every year we kind of get a little closer to that. But the fact is it's guided inquiry, because the most interesting thing about your question, the second content stream was called Lobster Untold Tales. So it was obviously about lobsters. And you could have kids coming in from Van Buren who quite literally, some 40% of the kids who come to the Coenset have never seen the ocean. I mean, those of us who live in coastal venues find that hard to believe. But if you live in western Maine or northern Maine, you don't. Then, that afternoon, you could have kids coming from Tennant's Harbor, and you'd ask them, which is right on the coast, and you'd ask them, like we ask all the kids, how many of you have ever been out on a fishing boat? I mean, the kids from Tennant's Harbor own a fishing boat. So you start with this huge range of awareness. And the trick in developing the content is to let the Tennant's Harbor kids go way deeper and let the kids from Van Buren have a great introductory experience to the ocean that they've never seen before. So my only answer to that is we are mindful of exactly what you're talking about. And you know, sometimes we do better than others.
What you're doing is really, really hard to do, and clearly it's working. Clearly you're doing it right, and it's remarkably, you know.
I think so.
Yeah.
But they didn't answer the question about how do you make a null find.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
I'll ask that question.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very important question.
So the first thing I would throw out, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. You're doing important work. And again, it goes back to the respect thing. The core piece of GMRI's pedagogy is that kids will always rise to your expectations of them. If you expect very little, you will get very little. In the Coen Center, they've seen over 100,000 kids. There has never been a behavior issue. It's just absolutely staggering. So it's conveying to them the importance of the work they're doing. What you're doing matters, and we very directly take on the question of a null finding. In the context that Dana has established, you know, there are zebra mussels in Lake Champlain. There aren't any in Maine yet. It's very important to look for them. Hope you don't find any. So it's trying to transition away from the instant results, instant gratification way that we are all served these years.
But it's also one of the places where, in doing the PD, where the GMRI starts with educators, you know, to make sure that they understand you're going to get this, and this is a good thing. So that really is there are a lot of different threads and programs and so forth that they've come up with to help address that issue, because it is an essential one. It happens all the time, of course. Anything else?
Gerhard has a question.
Yeah, I have a question about the invasive species and what happens when they find them. Do they actually destroy them, like kill them? And I'm sure there are pros and cons of each of them. And I mean, from a research perspective, I know, I mean, if you do observation, that's a legitimate method. and a lot of people at CFA do observations for obvious reasons, but it's clearly not the best scientific method that we have. Experiments are better. And do you, plan, or, how do you think about these things?
Yes, and of course, departments like the DEP and so forth, that's one of the big concerns. And so when it comes to milfoil is one of the big ones. So there's been a big mitigation effort around the specific species of milfoil that has had some success. But one of the things that really is that has been found is rather than mitigation is to avoid it getting there in the first place. And so you see a lot of communication. If you come into Maine, you'll see, don't bring firewood into Maine. Don't make sure you clean the prop off your boat before you take it out of the water. Put it in all this kind of clean your boat and so forth. So mitigation is a very, very difficult thing to do. But yes, it is undertaken. Sometimes with success, sometimes with not with success, sometimes with temporary success. But that is once an invasive species establishes itself, it is very, very difficult to undo that. And that's, of course, the green crab, again, is probably the best example where there are going to be green crabs there for the foreseeable future. And there's a lot, now one of the things, of course, they're trying to do is to create a consumer market around green crabs and so forth. So all of that kind of thing. It's a tough one. Experiments, I don't know, can you think of anybody who's done anything that would really be anything like an experiment involved with vital signs?
Well, killing them.
Well, that is, of course. But any other examples? So there's been some success. There's been a lot of effort put into doing that. All kinds of different techniques have been tried.
For instance, I think something that's more likely to happen is if you now try to launch your boat, you will find a citizen monitor at most every boat ramp in southern and western Maine inspecting your boat first.
That during the busy seasons.
And I think I don't really know the answer to your question, so let's start there. I think it probably depends on what the species is and what the public policy around that particular species or habitat it's invading is. I suspect it's variable, but I'm curious. I'm going to ask that question. So, what do you do when you find these guys?
So that citizen science observer, was that a direct result of your programming or a general awareness that you're contributing to?
Sorry, what?
So you mentioned about a citizen scientist observer for boat launches during the winter. I assume those are people of the lake associations.
Yes, they are. And the answer to your question is no, that wasn't a direct result of vital signs. But the way GMRI thinks about the invasives issue is it's not GMRI's issue. So, I happened to run into a bunch of people in a restaurant yesterday. It was the blah, 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 blah Invasive Species Task Force. And they were meeting at GMRI. So it's all the people in New England who are thinking about it. So GMRI's notion is to create this big tent to know what's going on and to see what their little tiny piece of work might contribute to more broadly.
So there's been buy-in.
Yes. And I would just say, and there needs to be. If there were not buy-in, forget it.
I have a question about the 70 reviewers.
Yes.
Who are reviewing, and first of all, it's hard to sustain a community of scientists to participate in an education project. It's not at their front line, even if it's connected to their research. What these kids are finding is not the core of their research. They're doing their own experiments. So I want to know about the incentives for sustaining that participation and the training for making that participation productive for the students.
Yes, and I'll make a comment. I think we probably caught that on the microphone. But I'll make a comment about that, and it gets worse every year because students are looking at the same patch around their school, around their home. The reviewers get pretty tired of saying, "Yeah, we saw that for the past 5 years. That's that same patch, and so forth." So it becomes a harder and harder problem.
And so that behooves, in the mission design aspect, it behooves GMRI working with the science community to say, what do you really want to learn about what is relevant? Because there's some stuff you see every time and you're always going to see, and it's not very interesting.
One last question, Ari, and then I think
It's
we'll-
really more of expressing a hope than a question, which is I would love to see some longitudinal data on these kids as they're growing up, what their attitudes are, what their approaches are. Obviously, there's all kinds of questions, interesting questions you can ask. I really hope that you guys have the resources to do that, because I think it's really crucial.
I think I might be in with a sympathetic audience here. We want to do that. Everybody wants to see that. Nobody wants to pay for that. And I'm not copping out.
No,
I'm not saying we don't hope to. We ask every time. I mean, we GMRI. People would put me on the spot with that question, and they would be foundation people. It's like, Yahoo! Here's what a longitudinal study costs. You interested?
What's that? If the NSF says your program can only be 4 years long, what do you do?
Yeah.
But I would love to. I really hope that there's some way that it's possible for you guys to do that, because I think it's going to show some remarkable stuff.
We're constantly thinking about that. We're doing some cheesy little things, like when kids come in, 40, 50 kids come in, how many of you think of yourself as a scientist? And it's not very many. And then when the 50 kids leave 2.5 hours later, I mean, it's cheesy but interesting.
And you can do 6 months later and a year later and so on, but I'm really thinking about,
And that's the neat thing about taking this comprehensive view, because it wouldn't be unusual for a middle schooler to have 3 fairly deep experiences with GMRI over a 4-year period. And then the other thing is, of course, just the anecdotal that we all live on. Lab Venture's been running just long enough for us to have gotten our first couple of letters from sophomores in college who have just set their major, claiming this was the most important experience in school I ever had. And of course, I don't know how many years that's out, but it's from 5th grade to 14th grade. But yes, a systematic longitudinal survey would be fantastic.
Well, with that, let's thank our...
Thank you all.